Shalom, everybody. Welcome to Sound the Call, a Jewish journey through COP26. My name is Jakir Manela, and I am here with my new friend, Gopal Patel, founder and director of Bhumi Global, who we just met here at COP26, and just landed this morning. Haven't slept in a while. Here with 30,000 of our closest friends in Glasgow, Scotland. It hasn't rained. It's been a cold and rainy day. No, it hasn't rained. It's been a cold, windy day, but it hasn't rained.
That's Glasgow.
Got to see the synagogue and have a bagel brunch with the local Jewish community, and then I've spent the day wandering through the Blue Zone with like 100 different pavilions of every country and every climate-oriented topic you could think of. Honestly, quite overwhelming. And then I found a session that I'd been looking for ahead of time, looking forward to, hosted by the World Wildlife Fund, something like, how can faith leaders create a nature-positive world? And heard Gopal speak. We had been connected by email before, we hadn't met, and we spent the last couple of hours together. So Gopal, thank you so much for showing me the ropes here. You're clearly a COP expert, and I think it'd be great for folks just to hear more about you and Bhumi Global's work. Yeah, let's start there.
We have a very complicated system. Mask on, mask off. It's like from Karate Kid. Jakir, nice to meet you. Yeah, we just met like a few hours ago, but maybe the Hindu in me would like to think that we met in a previous life. I don't know if that's acceptable for you.
I'll go with that.
Right. So so I run an organization called Bhumi Global. Bhumi is a Sanskrit word, which is the ancient language of India, and Bhumi means earth or Mother Earth specifically. And we are an environmental organization. We work with Hindus right across the world in India, Europe, East Africa, North America on issues of climate change, biodiversity, and pollution. And we chose the name Bhumi because, not just because it means Mother Earth, but it signifies an idea. And an idea which is very important to Hindu understanding of the world, which is that the world is alive, that the world is sacred, that the world is not just some object or inert matter, but the earth, the globe, as we see it, is a personality called Bhumi, Bhu Devi, actually. And she has a form in what we call the spiritual world, but when she appears in this material realm, she takes the form of the globe. Just as the rivers and the mountains all have spiritual forms, and when they take form here in the world, they take on these forms that we can understand and see. And so we chose the word Bhumi for that reason. And we do this work in many ways, to mainstream that idea, an idea which I think we all know is true in our hearts, but have forgotten for various reasons, which is that the earth is sacred. The earth is a gift. It's been given to us, or we've been asked to look after her or it, which, depending on how we want to look at it for our respective traditions. And so that's what we try to do. In addition to that, I co-chair the UN's Multifaith Advisory Council, which is 40 different faith groups at the UN. And I also sit on the advisory board for the UN's Decades on Ecosystem Restoration as well. So I'm really in this, our organization and myself, I've been doing this for 12 years, in this space around trying to mobilize Hindus and other people of different spiritualities and faiths on addressing the climate and biodiversity crisis. How's that for you?
Wow, we've been talking for a few hours. You didn't mention all of that. I knew about Bhumi Global, but wow, amazing to see. We were walking around and we saw the Archbishop of Canterbury, the head of the English Church. We saw the chief rabbi of the British Commonwealth, I think is the term.
Maybe, I'm not sure.
You pointed him out.
Well, I don't know if he's the Archbishop of the Commonwealth. He may just be the Archbishop.
No, but the rabbi, the chief rabbi.
Oh, the chief rabbi. I don't know if it's for the Commonwealth or just for.
We were playing religious leader bingo, and we scored a few points.
We did get a few points. Yes, we did.
So there are definitely faith leaders here,
Yeah.
and you clearly have experience working with these folks in this context of a climate conference. It's the first day. The opening ceremony was a few hours ago.
Yep.
President Biden gave a speech. It was interesting. I was walking through the pavilions here, and he shows up on a TV screen, and like 100 people stop and gather. And it wasn't the U.S. Center, which is just down the way here. It was some not American center, but clearly, what the American president says on this has a big impact on this issue. So people gathered to hear his speech. And then I wanted to lift up, particularly because of your role in working with faith leaders across the world in this context, a couple of things that were said in your session, where it was you and Karenna Gore of the Center for Earth Ethics.
Right.
Tell us who else was in that session, and then some of the most deeply, I think, moving commentary there felt to me like powerful to hear in a UN context, but maybe you've heard it before, which is like, this is not just an energy crisis. It's not even just like a nature restoration crisis. There's a moral and a spiritual crisis here. And to hear these like different faith leaders from across the world speak to that was pretty powerful. And I think we actually have the link. I think we may try to post it on our website, but just share more about who was in that room and what was that session.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it was an event hosted by WWF, the World Wildlife Fund, and it was to talk about the role of faith groups advocating not just for nature, but for biodiversity. And biodiversity is a fancy way of saying nature or the environment or wildlife. And so, as you said, we had Karenna Gore from the Center for Earth Ethics, myself. We had Dan Perel from the Baha'i UN office. We had Sister Jayanti from the Brahma Kumaris, and we had Deborah Boudreau from the Buddhist Tzu Chi Foundation. So you had a good spread, I would say, of different spiritualities and traditions and geographies and cultures. And yeah, it is interesting because like the conversation we had today, it was a really good conversation. But it kind of speaks to something we were talking about earlier. It's a conversation I've had many times before. I'm in those spaces on an almost daily basis with my work, talking to other religious, spiritual leaders or representatives about the moral dimension to the climate crisis. And it is interesting when people who don't hear that angle hear it for the first time. It's like, can I say they have like a coming to Jesus moment? Am I allowed to say that?
It's called an epiphany.
So they have an epiphany. They're like, oh, wow, this is something very new, very interesting. And you're right that the environmental crisis, it is a technical crisis. It's a crisis of finance and fossil fuels and so on. But at its heart, it is a crisis of values, of morality, of ethics. And you can trace the roots. You can trace the roots to the Industrial Revolution, where we started to decide that we can use nature for our needs without thinking about what we were doing to the environment. You can even trace it back to Columbus and his arrival in the Americas. And you could trace it back to the papal bulls that came out the year after Columbus arrived in the Americas, where the Pope at the time said that Christians are allowed to take over any land which hadn't already been claimed by Christians. And those instructions and the Industrial Revolution and so on set forth a series of events and moments which are really based in certain values that we can control nature, values that we can dominate nature, values that we can do whatever we want to nature and we don't need to care. And, in Hinduism, we would say, this is our karma. What you put out comes back in. We've put out destruction and decay and so many horrible things onto the planet for the last couple of 100 years. And that's not without repercussions. And we're facing those repercussions right now. So this is definitely a crisis of values. And where we are right now, I think, which is what we spoke about in the event, is where do we want to go? What value system do we need to have to get out of this? Because as Einstein said, you can't use the same thinking every time and expect a different solution. Our thinking is wrong. Our thinking has been wrong for many, many years. what are the new paradigms? What are the new frameworks we need to develop to get ourselves out of this? I think that's what we discussed today, and that was really powerful.
Oh, man, thank you. You know, another thing that was said during, by the way, in case you haven't figured it out, we haven't rented a private room for this podcast. We're in the Pavilion Hall, so you might hear some background. So one of the other things that was said in that session was, I think it might have been you that said it.
I have been known to say
you've been saying a lot of things, and it was the World Wildlife Fund and this term nature positive. We think about climate as fundamentally a question of what is our energy infrastructure, right? Coal versus solar, and that is clearly a huge part of it.
Right.
And I think it was you that said, and others in that session, fully a third of this challenge and third of the solution is about nature and how much nature, how much green space is there, how many trees, how much habitat is there. That is sequestering carbon. And it's also really about quality of life as well for humanity. I have been, as you know, I'm stepping into my new role as you know at Hazon, thinking about where is our sweet spot and wheelhouse, and we do so much around food and farming and connecting people to nature. I think that story is not told enough, that we can't just solve this through changing you turn on the light the same amount of hours and it just go into something else instead of, right, that we didn't have to do anything. We just, the Congress, please God, will pass a lot of money to move that in the right direction. It needs to happen. And what is our relationship to nature? What is our relationship to green space? And that comes back to Devi, is that what you said? Gaia?
Yeah.
And I think I'm trying to think, what is the Jewish conception of that? It's all one. It's echad. It's unity. And we are all part of Bria, creation. I think to speak to like what is I think there's a real connection between the nature positive movement, which I hadn't heard that term until today, the nature positive movement. So you speak to more of that. Yeah. And what does that overlap? Because we've been talking about what is the added value of the faith communities here. Maybe that's really getting at something that, an energy analyst or an energy, that's critical. We have to support that happening. And there's something more here that could be as big as a third of the picture. And it's certainly a huge part of like the human experience.
Sure.
Right?
Yeah. So there's a phrase, little pithy 30 phrase, which will be helpful to remember, which is that nature is 30. What that means is like nature, biodiversity, if we don't cut down any more trees, kill any more wildlife and pollute any more oceans, just by preserving what we have right now, that will get us 30% to the Paris climate agreement. If we just stop, let's just stop. That's just like 30%, which is huge. If we don't cut down any more trees or anything like that, right? But wow. And so that's why we're saying 30%. Part of the challenge is the drivers of what we call biodiversity loss, the drivers of deforestation, the drivers of the oceans being polluted or overfished is consumption, human consumption, right? We know that the biggest driver of deforestation in the Amazon is beef production, right? So those people who are eating beef are contributing, unfortunately to the deforestation of the Amazon, right? All these things are interconnected, right? We know that like an action in this part of the world now has implications in another part of the world and another part of the world. So we need to radically shift our consumption patterns if we are to protect biodiversity. And as you're saying, food is a huge makeup of that. Again, I think food accounts for, I think I said today, a quarter or a third of all emissions, right? And so every day, because this year I did a lot of work on food systems at the UN, every day, 3 times a day, for most people, we are making an environmental decision, right? What we put on our plate is an environmental decision. Like where does that food come from? Who grew it? Who transported it? What animals were killed, if any at all? So like this isn't complicated stuff. It literally starts at your dinner table 3 times a day. What are you having for breakfast? What are you having for lunch? What are you having for dinner? And so I think, when we talk about the value add of faith-based organizations, it is sometimes the big picture stuff around like these holy concepts and theology and all that kind of stuff. But it's also like just the very basics of like, what is a good life? What kind of person do we want to be? What kind of community do we want to live in? And if you strip away all the stories and all the rituals that we all have in our traditions, which we all love and are really important, that's what it comes down to. Like, how are you going to be a good father? How are you going to be a good student? How are you going to be a good professional? And our faiths inform that. And I think that's what, increasingly, I'm thinking that's what the faith contribution is. The big lofty ideals are good in these forums, but for most people, it's about how can I lead a good life now, where I'm not harming the planet and I'm not harming other people, I'm not harming the animals of the world. And I think that is our contribution at this stage.
There's a Hebrew word "dainu," with a song we sing in Passover, which is about. And
are you going to sing it? I'll join in. Come.
You don't know the song? You know the song? Okay. It's about if this happened, it would have been enough. If this had been enough. And when you talk about like, if all we could do was just help people think about what is the good life,
right,
and like with clarity and focus in this moment, Diana, like that would be enough about value added.
Right.
We're trying to do more than that, but that's like really at its core, as you said.
Yeah.
And we were talking about this a little bit before. Like that's really potent. That's really moving.
Mm-hmm.
There's 30,000 people here. It's a massive undertaking.
Yeah.
Somebody was just talking about, we heard somebody who's been here for many events and said, sometimes I wonder if they took all the money that went into this gathering and just like planted some trees and gave it to a bunch of grants or Bhumi Gopal or anybody. And with that, piece of skepticism is, as I was sharing, not a great reputation that the United Nations has per se in the Jewish community, for stuff that happens in Israel.
Yeah.
But it's a massive organization, and you have a particular role. It's actually year-round and over the course of many years.
Mm-hmm.
So can you just tell us a little more about like what is the work of the Multifaith Advisory Council? Mm-hmm. What is it like to see this work of the UN, particularly focused on climate, and you said biodiversity? Those are the two big areas you've been involved
that
in?
I work on. Yeah.
Which is very different from all the, frankly, hard experiences the Jewish community has had from with the United Nations. So just tell us more about that work. And we were talking before about would it make sense and how might it make sense for Hazon and Jewish organizations to get involved. So touch on that if you like, but just how does that work inform you, and where do you see the impact in that, both in your work and across the world?
Yeah, so the Multifaith Advisory Council is just one interfaith body connected to the UN. There are others as well. And I think what the value add is, if I can be honest, is just that UN, like any human institution, like any religious institution, is imperfect and needs help, needs reform, needs to do better, right? And we can all admit that for ourselves in our own lives and in our families and businesses and all the way up to the United Nations. And so what we try to do at the Multifaith Advisory Council is support and advise the UN when needed about how to best engage with religious institutions, because the UN is not an expert on religion. It's an expert on many things, but certainly not on religion. And so it needs people or institutions, religious groups, FBOs, faith-based organizations, to be at the table to say, hey, look, for example, around the COVID vaccines, a lot of hesitancy in faith-based organizations, faith institutions on the vaccine. There have been a number of consultations and meetings between the WHO and the Multifaith Advisory Council around how do we get more religious people to take the vaccine? What's the language we need to use? What can we say? What can't we say? And things like that. And we know if faith leaders speak up around getting the vaccine, people listen. You know, if the imam stands up, or the rabbi, or the swami, or the priest, the congregants will listen, right? So that's just one example, and there are many others of how the Multifaith Advisory Council and other faith engagement at the UN can strengthen the work of the UN to be more sensitive, to be a little bit more engaged, be a bit more nuanced when it works with faith-based institutions. The other opportunity, I think, and speaking to the other part of your question, which is that the world is in need of new ideas. You know, it's been running on old ideas or a limited set of ideas for the last 70 years or so. And the world has changed in the last 70 years, geopolitically, economically, socially, culturally. And new ideas need to come to the table. And I think that's one reason I engage with the UN, because I want to bring Hindu ideas to the UN. Not because I think Hindu ideas are the best. Some of them are pretty funny, some of them are outdated, some of them are really interesting. But you need to be at the table in order to get your ideas heard, right? And if I'm contributing Hindu ideas and this person's contributing Buddhist ideas and this person's contributing Muslim ideas, it's an interesting conversation, but we can see, oh, actually, there's some commonality here. We can see that there are other ways of thinking or being. And I think there's a lot in the Jewish community that needs to be heard at the global level. You know, I know you told me that Jews make up 0.02% of the world's population, but you have some great ideas. Like the fact that you told me this year is the year of Shemitah, the year of rest for the earth. That's like a radical idea. No other religion, as far as I know, has that idea that every seven years, you just don't do anything.
Yeah.
Sorry. That's why you told me you're not doing any work.
You let the land rest and you forgive debts. It's an active rest. Yes, but you got the idea. You got the general idea.
But that's a great idea, you know, to bring that to the table and share it with others, other faith groups at the UN, share it with the UN itself. They probably aren't going to adopt it, but it's interesting to get people thinking. And so I think that's why it is important for different faith traditions, spiritualities to engage at the UN, because the world is going through changes. And as I said earlier, the value systems that have got us here have been really good in some respects and been really, really bad in other respects. And we need new ideas in the mix in order to get us out of this mess. And I think the Jewish community can bring a lot in that respect.
Mm. You've inspired me. I want to learn more and explore more with you. You've clearly figured out how to navigate that, so we can explore that together. It is true that in 1998, 99, there was a movement, I think the UN was involved, called Jubilee 2000, which was a debt forgiveness, debt relief movement based on the Shemitah year. 7 cycles of 7 years is the Jubilee year. That the level of disruption and change happening in the world right now feels to me like we're not just necessarily in a Shemitah year, although we are. We could even be in a Yovel year, a Jubilee year. We've always kept track of when the Shemitah year is. We don't know when the Jubilee year is.
Can we work it out right now?
If anybody could, you could, but I don't think.
Yeah, just because I'm Indian doesn't mean I'm good at math, right?
I don't know. So there is some, cultural resonance with this idea. And then the other thing I wanted to share, and then we'll close in a couple minutes.
Yeah.
We were talking about some similarities in the American Jewish experience and the American Hindu experience, American Indian experience.
Right.
And is there something there? We certainly could draw, unequal signs. Like there's not necessarily complete alignment with the theology of Jewish monotheism and Hindu theology. And I actually am excited to go eat dinner and talk all about that with you. But while that realm is maybe not as clear, there's so much experience that we have in America as minorities, coming up, working hard, achieving success. One idea we were just batting back and forth is like, is there a way not just to be sort of talking to our faith communities from a religious perspective, from textbook perspective, but to mobilize the ingenuity and the entrepreneurship and the business savvy of our communities in this direction, you know, and
Right.
some Jewish and Hindu folks are already in the climate tech and green tech. What would it mean for us to try to really spark that in a bigger way? And maybe there's even something, you know, that could happen side by side, or at least learning from each other. I just wonder if you have any other reflections on, you know, our communities, particularly in America, but also globally, and what we can learn from each other, how we can support each other.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think about it a lot. I mean, a lot of my close friends are Jewish in the UK and in America. You know, I'll say also, I'll start by saying that although theologically there may be some commonalities, I think we'll explore that over dinner tonight. But historically, there are some commonalities as well, because Christianity and Islam are kind of defined in reference to Judaism. And in India, Sikhism, Buddhism, Jainism are all defined as opposition to Hinduism by saying, we are not that. Just as Christianity and Islam says, like, we are not that. You know, so so I have a scholar friend in the US who calls Judaism and Hinduism the mother religions. That out of those two traditions came the other traditions, and those other traditions position themselves in opposition, or saying they are not what they came out of. So I think that's very interesting. That's more of an academic exercise, but I think that's quite fascinating that we come from the two mother religions of the East and the West. And then the immigrant experience, or like the current lived experience of Jews and Hindus or Indians in the US and globally, I would say is fascinating, because I would say, I don't want to speak for the Jewish community, but I would definitely say for the Hindu community, as I was telling you earlier, we have an outsized representation in the US when it comes to the tech sector. Head of Microsoft, head of Google, head of so many big tech firms of Indian, Hindu origin. In healthcare, you know, I wouldn't be surprised if your doctor is an Indian or Jewish, right? You know, in finance, Wall Street in the US, the City of London here in the UK. You know, we have an outsized influence, and it's because again, I don't want to speak for the Jewish community, but I know for the Hindu community, it's about like staying under the radar, just being good citizens, getting your kids through school, abiding by the law, and just getting ahead quietly and slowly, without fuss, looking after your own. And I think, and the Hindu community looks to the Jewish community for leadership and inspiration. I know here in the UK, the neighborhoods around London that were initially Jewish, the Jews have moved out, now the Hindus have moved in. It's quite fascinating actually to see that. Yeah. And so the Hindu community looks to the Jewish community because, again, the Hindus see themselves as persecuted, just as the Jewish community has been. I mean, the Hindu community is the majority in India, but for 800 years, it's a paradigm that the West, I think struggles with, is that for 800 years, the majority was ruled by a minority. The majority Hindus was ruled first by a minority Muslim, whatever, and then ruled by the British, right? And that's a paradigm that we don't have in the West. In the West, it's always the majority rules over the minority. Anyway, so I think there's commonalities there as well. So I would be fascinated to see, because there is so much respect within the Hindu community for the Jewish community, and that the Hindu community looks to the Jewish community as a couple of steps ahead, you know, that like, oh, these guys, they've worked it out, how to be a minority, but ensure that the community is safe, both domestically and internationally with respect to Israel and so on like that. And so it would be fascinating to see, like I used to live in New York. I think there are some Jews in New York. I think I've seen them around.
Last time I checked.
Yeah. So it would be interesting to see like where we can get some Hindus and Jews together to talk about what do we have in common, how can we work together? Because I think the ethic, the work ethic, the family ethic, care for the environment, I think they're very much aligned, and it would be fascinating to see that.
Well, we're already off to a good start here.
Yeah.
And this conversation feels great, and this day has been really amazing, and it really did start honestly a little bit overwhelming for me, and our conversation, our relation has been great for me today.
Good.
So thank you.
Glad.
And I want to just offer a chance to close. I heard you say earlier that you're thinking about a book where here's a few stories about different deities told through the lens of nature. So either if you already have one that is your favorite, or any just like Hindu teaching that you feel like sort of encapsulates. You spoke at the beginning about sort of, you know, that the world is a being, it's sacred, you know. So any other stories or teachings you just want to share with us that inform and inspire you and your people as your community as you walk this path?
I'll just tell the story. I shared it in the session earlier today, I think, which is that the very first teaching in Hinduism, in the very first book, there are many books in Hinduism, but the Rig Veda is the first book. And the very first teaching in that is this understanding that there is a universal balance or order in the cosmos, in the universe. And it's in Sanskrit, the word is Rita, R-T-A. And it's said that this balance, this equilibrium we find in creation is only sustained when we lead lives of personal and collective responsibility, we lead lives of non-violence, of non-stealing, of being good people. And so for me, that's what I keep coming back to, because we're out of balance. The world is out of balance. The environment is in decay and collapse because we are so out of sync with the rhythms of the earth. And we can restore it, but it's up to us. It's not so much the finance and this and that. It's about individual personal conduct. Are we good, honest, truthful, upstanding citizens, essentially? And it's kind of taboo to talk about that, I think, now in contemporary society, about being a good person. When do we ever hear about that anymore? Especially in the current political climate of the United States. But I think it really is that simple. If everybody is just honest and responsible, doesn't try to hurt other people, we can put the balance back in. And so that's what kind of gives me a bit of hope, and that's kind of what inspires me the most as well.
Amen. That is beautiful. I should note, we're taking off our masks just to help everybody at home feel comfortable. We took a test before we got here.
Oh.
We brought our vaccine cards. We take a rapid test every day. Masks on all the time. So everybody's being safe, Mom.
Yeah. Yes, Mom, we're all safe.
We're safe. So thank you, Gopal. I really, really appreciate this. And I want to share with you a piece of our tradition that I've been thinking about a lot coming here. And not just for me, but for all of us here, because really everyone here is on a mission to create that balance. I think that really is like a shared project. I don't think I've ever been part of a shared communal project so like intensively as a week of 30,000 people really trying to like focus our mental, emotional, spiritual, and political energy in this direction. It's really profound. And so just like praying for that balance, that mission of balance to be restored, for that mission to be there. So praying for all of these travelers, many of whom came from down the street or down the road from London, and many of whom coming from all over the world. I mean, coming through the airport and seeing and just walking around here, it is so amazing to see the full beauty and diversity of humanity. It's such an honor to be here. And so this is a prayer from our tradition, the Traveler's Prayer, to just send blessings to you and to your community and to everybody here that's on this journey together. So the Traveler's Prayer says, may it be your will, may it be your will, Creator, that you lead us toward peace, guide our footsteps toward peace, and make us reach our desired destination for life, gladness, and peace. May you rescue us from the hand of every foe ambush along the way, and from all manner of punishments that assemble to come to earth. May you send blessing in our work and grant us grace, kindness, and mercy in your eyes and in the eyes of all who see us. May you hear the sound of our humble request. Blessed are you, Creator, who hears prayer. Gopal. Thank you, my friend.
Thank you. Amen.
Thanks, everybody. We'll see you next time. Shalom.